Hello everyone! Welcome to this video where I am continuing the Best of series, and this time I'm going to talk about the Best of Barbara Bain. Been looking forward to this for a long time. There has been an increase in the amount of discussion on the Facebook forum that we have, talking about the good and the bad of some of the ladies who've been on the show. I'd like to think that maybe some of the videos that I've made have kind of contributed to that. I'm glad that people are finding that all interesting. And now here we are, we've gone to the lady who set the tone and started it all, Barbara Bain. In doing the videos and looking at the tenure of all of the ladies on this show, I found a lot of trends, many of which I've pointed out. And Barbara Bain also fits a lot of these trends during her time on the show. Some episodes, she doesn't figure in very much at all, or just because she's the woman. Okay, I'll talk more about that later. Good example would be the episode The Train. She's a nurse and, okay, well, we need a girl to fill that role. All right, well, there we go. A lot of the times, she is just a placeholder or part of the team. A good example would be the season 1 episode Action, where there's just a role that needs to be filled at a particular time, and because of circumstances, it just makes sense that she does it. Another example would be in season 3, there's the episode The Test Case, where the men are busy doing other things. And so she has to take a particular role as part of the mission. There are also episodes, and this is the case for the other female leads as well, where she has to take a back seat because there's a female guest star. For example, the episode The Traitor in season 1, where Eartha Kitt was heavily featured. Cinnamon is present, but does very, very little. There's the episode Spy in season 2, where Kate Woodville is the main antagonist, and so Cinnamon's role is minimal as well. There's an interesting case in season 3 in the two-parter The Bunker, where Cinnamon Carter is a huge part of the episode, but for much of the episode, she's played by Lee Merriweather because Cinnamon is wearing a mask of Anna Rojak. So, there's a lot of variety there, and I'm pointing those out just to kind of set the tone for what I'm about to do, because some of this is going to be a little bit of a deconstruction, at least some people might see it that way, of the Barbara Bain mystique. I don't mean it to be like that, but there are some things that I want to point out. A really important thing that I think we need to think about when it comes to assessing Barbara Bain's time on the show is that in her specific case, there are a lot of unique circumstances that contributed to her being right up at the top of this list. There is no question, and please do not make the mistake that I, in any way, shape, or form, are trying to make the case that she doesn't belong at the top of this list. To say anything other than that would be ridiculous. But I do want to point out the circumstances that I'm referring to here. First of all, very clearly, it's from season 1. We see that because of the issues related to Stephen Hill and his difficulties, keeping up with the show and some of the things that he wanted and some of the things that he wasn't happy about, Martin Landau had to step up and take the role of being the team leader. That kind of automatically puts Barbara Bain in a better position. Whether it just kind of be, subconscious on the part of the writers or the producers or whatever, I think some of that definitely happened. There was, for certain, there was a pecking order. And it continued into seasons 2 and 3, where obviously Peter Graves became the team leader, and Martin Landau took on more of kind of the Lancer role in a sense, where he's the second in command, but still gets to do a lot of good stuff. Barbara Bain continued to benefit from that, and also from the fact that the way that things had gone, as far as the writers and producers were kind of handling the series, Greg Morris and Peter Lupus were kind of at the bottom of that pecking order. And, again, subconsciously, deliberately, whatever you want to say, Cinnamon and Rollin, their characters were at a certain point, and Barney and Willie were at a certain point. They had their roles, and Cinnamon and Rollin had their roles, and Jim Phelps was kind of in the middle, kind of as a balance there. There are great discussions, as I mentioned, going on about this in the Facebook group. That I think is important to keep in mind. That Barbara Bain definitely benefited just from circumstances that happened on the show. Let me give an analogy. The first one that I thought of was Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was a fantastic, awesome baseball player. Had all sorts of records. He doesn't have a whole lot of them anymore, but still, he was an awesome player. There can be no denial of that fact, but there can also be no denial of the fact that he benefited from a lot of circumstances. He spent a lot of time on the New York Yankees team of the 1920s and the early 1930s. It was one of the greatest teams of all time. He had Lou Gehrig, one of the greatest players of all time, hitting behind him so that pitchers couldn't, pitch around him. And that's why he was able to hit home runs and set all sorts of records. He was in the biggest media market in the United States, and that also contributed to his popularity. All sorts of things contributed to that. Maybe a better, more modern example related to the entertainment world is Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. I know him as The Rock. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. In my IT contracting role, I used to work for WWF Canada when they had an office. There was a point where I happened to be in the same room as Dwayne Johnson for about 10 seconds. This was back in 2002 when WrestleMania 18 was here in Toronto. I don't want to make more out of it than it was. I managed to get a glimpse of him. We were in the same room. And now, of course, Dwayne Johnson is one of, if not the, most popular, most desirable A-list actors in Hollywood. But he started, of course, by working in the wrestling world. Now, a lot of circumstances contributed to that. Wrestling became really, really hot at that time. He had the machine of the World Wrestling Federation behind him to make him more and more popular. A lot of circumstances contributed to that. He had a lot of help along the way, and he has acknowledged that help. And he gets all the credit for making it happen because of his charisma and his natural ability. But he acknowledges the circumstances. If you look at any of his work, you'll see that his company is called $7 Entertainment. And the reason that is the case is because when he got his first major contract for wrestling, he had $7 in his bank account, and he hasn't forgotten that, and he hasn't forgotten the people that brought him there. So in the same way, I think that we should look at Barbara Bain's time on the show as, her getting the credit for her charisma and her ability to make it happen, but acknowledging the circumstances that made it happen. She's awesome. She set the tone. She benefited greatly by the fact that Martin Landau was able to step up and demonstrate that he could take control of the show. In the same way, Martin Landau is an awesome actor. Everybody loves Roland Ham. Yes, but he also had some luck in Stephen Hill taking a bit of a backseat for all sorts of reasons. Speaking of which, there's also the issue of better scripts. I've already mentioned that either deliberately or more likely subconsciously, the writers emphasized the Landaus at the expense of Greg Morris and Peter Lupus. From the Facebook group, I saw a post from Tom Bennett, who has spoken to his friend Paul Playden, one of the writers. Paul Playden says he didn't deliberately do this, putting the Landaus ahead of some of the other people, but I don't know. I think some of the other writers did. And any script that they had to have a prominent role for Martin, with few exceptions, and there had to be a role for the girl. That brings me to another point. There's also what's called the Smurfette principle. If you remember the show The Smurfs, where there was these, blue dwarfy characters, all of whom were male except that there was one girl, Smurfette. And there is the tendency, it hasn't completely gone away. There's less of it nowadays. But the tendency, especially at the time we're talking about back in the 60s and 70s, the television shows were written by men, in many cases for men, with stereotypical male-dominated ideas and thinking. Even today, take a show like The Big Bang Theory. At least in the beginning, it was all guys and there was one girl, right? Even that show, for quite some time, had the Smurfette principle. I know that obviously they had more female characters as time went on. Think of Princess Leia in Star Wars. That's another really, really good example. And the writers are human. They gravitated toward what they knew. They gravitated to what they were familiar with and what was easier for them to deal with. So the easier thing for them to do would be to write scripts in, with ideas that they could wrap their heads around and say, okay, well, what role do we give the girl? Let's give her that one. And that's, I think, what happened. Barbara definitely made the most of it. A show like this requires a team effort. It was very important for Barbara to be able to step up when necessary and step back when required. Her versatility in different roles really shone through in a way that it didn't really happen for any of the other mainline actresses except Jane Badler. It's very, very difficult to do a TV series role as it is. Being an actor or an actress on a television show is definitely hard work and long hours. But at least in 99% of cases, for most shows, if you're in that position, you at least get to play the same character every week. You can get yourself into a groove. You start to learn about the character. You start to, make the character a part of yourself and give it aspects of yourself. It's not really possible to do that in a show like this. In Mission Impossible, the actors and the actresses have different roles every week. And I've heard, obviously there's not really a way to confirm this without hearing it from her specifically, but it seems that Leslie Warren struggled with this. I don't know how much Linda Day George would have struggled with it. I don't think as much because maybe she had a little bit more experience in that regard. Any actress would find this difficult, and Barbara Bain had the advantage, again, of being the first. She set the tone, as I've said. She set the standard by which anybody else would be measured. And I think, the actresses who came after her, especially Leslie Warren, suffered greatly because everybody said, well, she's no Barbara. And even Linda, I don't hear that as much about Linda Day George, but I think it's there. The ladies who came in the revival, of course, well, that was kind of a whole different ball of wax. But let's think about those things. And now that I've kind of done the deconstruction thing a little bit, let's move on to talk about the fact that Barbara was great. Okay, so now that I've been through all that, essentially sort of deconstructing, in a sense, the role of the female IMF agent, and specifically Barbara Bain's role in kind of setting the tone for what the female agent should be, let's talk about her specifically. Barbara Bain is 91 years old now. She studied acting under several people, including, of all people, I was surprised to find this, Lonnie Chapman, who played a couple of roles on the show. She's done bit parts here and there, according to IMDb, ending in 2020, including reprising the role of Cinnamon Carter on an episode of Diagnosis Murder in 1997. In an episode which featured old friends of Dick Van Dyke, including herself, Patrick McNee from The Adventures, Robert Culp from I Spy, Robert Vaughn from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. She married Martin Landau in 1957. That's no secret to anybody, I think, who is watching this video. They divorced in 1993 and have two children, Susan and Juliet. You may have known Juliet as Drusilla on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Not a show that I watched a lot, but she had a pretty prominent role there. According to my conversation with Peter Lupus, she's become a very private person now, even more so than she has been over the last few years, where even Mr. Lupus says that he's not able to contact her anymore. So I don't imagine anything short of a miracle would allow me to actually talk to her, even for a few minutes. My gosh, that would just be fantastic. But she has done interviews about her time on the show over the years, and those are not difficult to find on YouTube and other places. Speaking about her specifically on the show, her time on the show was actually started when, she was auditioning, and Lucille Ball kind of took a liking to her specifically and said, oh yeah, she's going to be really, really good for this, which really kind of obviously pumped her up, given the stature of Lucille Ball. She also, interestingly, suffers from a lot of the problems that the other female agents had. So that's something really, really interesting that's come out of my analysis of all this, that this is a systematic thing. It's not just about Barbara. It's not about it's not about one person in particular. It's about the nature of the role itself. It's about the nature of the show itself. There are a lot of episodes where Barbara Bain basically just kind of, is part of the team, and but she disappears kind of halfway through the episode, as is the case with a lot of the female agents, just about all of them. The Diamond, for example, is a good one. She's really heavily involved in the setup, and then she's gone towards the end. The Widow, The Survivors, The Test Case, lots of examples of that. There are several episodes where she's a part of the team, and she has really, really nice moments that do stand out. A good example of that would be the episode The Town, where she's involved in the key points of the rescue of Jim Phelps in that one. But most of them really just involve her, working alongside Roland Hand. Good examples of that are, episodes like Doomsday and The Phoenix. She's just part of the distraction, or a lot of the times she's just involved in putting an idea in the target's head that either threatens the target's plans or puts an idea in their head so that the IMF can manipulate their target towards where they want that target to go. A good example of that would be, for example, The Elixir, with Ruth Roman as the antagonist. Cinnamon is involved in getting this thing in Ruth Roman, who plays Reva Santel in that one, getting it into her head that, oh my gosh, there is this fountain of youth, and of course she wants it. Once that is established, Cinnamon really doesn't have anything to do for the rest of the episode. That's just kind of how it goes in a lot of situations. However, there are some episodes where things are better than average for her, and these are the ones that I'm going to point out. I wanted to make about 20 of them, given that Barbara was in about 70 episodes or so. I thought that that would be about right. And I'm actually able to group them into 4 sets of 5. It just kind of worked out this way. With the bottom 5, I would say that she's basically just that kind of plot device, as I just outlined. But I feel that it's slightly better than average. Your mileage may vary about these. There are lots of episodes in which this is the case, and you could kind of pick and choose and say that, you know what, no, I like this one better, I like that one better. You could throw a blanket over a lot of episodes and put them in this group. But here are the ones that I would choose. So in terms of just having kind of a list, number 20 would be season 1, episode 12, Fake Out. This is a really, really, really horrible episode in just about every possible way that you can analyze it. However, Cinnamon's role here, she's fine, she's feminine, and she's featured. The 3 F's. And that's why I would say that this one, for her, is slightly above average, even though it is just a terrible episode. Another one that is very much like that is what I'll put at number 19, Season 2, Episode 14, Echo of Yesterday. She is the main plot device that pushes the plot forward for the purposes of getting to where the writers wanted to be in this episode. But it's really, really not worth it in the end. And this is not a good plot, not a good story. However, she's got the 3 F's. She's fine, she's feminine, she's featured. Good for her. Number 18, very, very similar. Although slightly different, I guess you could say, in that, her being feminine is not so highlighted. Season 2, Episode 20, The Counterfeiter. She works with Martin Landau, Raw in hand, in order to manipulate the mark. And she is the key focus and feature of the episode here. But again, this is right at the bottom of the list in terms of overall quality of episodes. Number 17, I'll give to Season 1, Episode 7, Wheels. This is the first episode where Cinnamon kind of has multiple roles. She has 2 roles in this. The first role is to do some reconnaissance in order to get information so that the IMF can establish the plot that they want to pull in order to complete their mission. And then after that, her role pivots towards having a subplot with a Raw in hand lookalike in order to complete the mission. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that in and of itself. Just that sort of thing is not really my cup of tea. It doesn't make for a good Mission Impossible episode, in my opinion. However, her role and, of course, her chemistry with Martin Landau is undeniable, and that's why I'm going to put this one here. I'm going to follow that one up with number 16 for the purposes of the list, Season 3, Episode 24, Illusion. Again, not an episode that I particularly like. It's got a lot of flaws and it's got a lot of plot holes. You can see my full review for that if you'd like to hear everything that I want to say. That's not her fault. It's definitely not her fault that this is not a good episode where things kind of really come together well. But she does get to have a lot of fun here. She gets to show some versatility. She works at different levels, at different stages of the plot, kind of as the plot demands. So a good outing for her here. Moving on to the next section. This is where I have a group of episodes, 5 of them, where I find her to be a bit more of an advanced plot device, mostly as a distraction for the purposes of getting the mission done. So the first one I'll put in this group, number 15, Season 2, Episode 5, The Slave. And this one I'm going to put in here because she does a lot more work in this one. And she's a lot more lively in this in terms of the things that she has to do and the characters that she has to play. It's a real shame that her good work in this one is diminished because of the ambivaliousness of the episode overall, and that's where we lose out on things a little bit. Moving on, number 14, Season 1, Episode 4, Old Man Out. This is kind of a cult favorite among the fandom, and it's an enjoyable episode. Never denied that it was. I have pointed out its flaws in that it being a 2-parter, it is one where things are drawn out a lot more than they need to be. It's a 2-parter is generally a 1-parter that kind of spins out of control. Again, none of the problems in this episode are related to anything to do with Barbara Bain or the Cinnamon Carter character. This one is also very unique because, unlike most episodes where, unlike I think every other episode where, there is a prominent female guest star, this is one where the female guest star and the main agent share the spotlight. Marianne Mobley, of course, appears as Crystal in this episode. And normally that would mean that Cinnamon Carter would have to take kind of a back seat. Think of other episodes where that did happen. For example, The Traitor, where Eartha Kitt was basically the main feature of the episode. Barbara Bain was present, but she was only in a couple of scenes, and she really didn't do anything. That's a typical case where there is a female guest star. But here, that doesn't happen. And of course, Cinnamon and Crystal have to share a lot of scenes because part of the episode is them having some catfighting and that sort of thing. And so here, this one works as a good outing for Barbara. Moving on to number 13, season 3, episode 4, The Mercenaries. Here's one where Cinnamon is just really a distraction for the Mark so that the men can do their part in the episode. But what a distraction. This one calls forward to the revival episode Command Performance, where Shannon Reed, Jane Badler, has to do a similar kind of thing for the purposes of keeping the mission going. I hadn't actually thought about that until I went back and thought about making this list. But this is probably the one where Barbara plays up her sexuality the most. Moving on, number 12, season 2, episode 18, The Emerald. This is the same idea. Cinnamon is a distraction, kind of an advanced plot device. The physical work of the mission is done by the men, but she gets to play one of the marks, one of the targets, Victor Tomar, like a fiddle, and she is very, very effective in doing so. Number 11, the astrologer. She is a critical part of the IMF plan to use the rivalry between the two antagonists to the IMF's advantage. And it's great watching her manipulate them in the way that she does. Really good outing for her here. Moving on to the next group of episodes. This is where things are getting much better for Barbara overall and the Cinnamon Carter character. Number 10 on this list I'm going to put as season 1, episode 10, The Carriers. This is an above average plot. It's an above average role for Barbara Bain. And coincidentally, or not so coincidentally perhaps, based on what I said at the outset of this is really the first time we see Martin Landau step up and be the mission leader for the episode and the conductor of the orchestra, so to speak. So maybe it's not so much a coincidence that Barbara gets a really prominent role as well. This is a really good one to demonstrate her versatility in taking on different roles depending on the circumstances that occur within the mission and throughout the episode. Number 9, I will give to season 2, episode 15, The Photographer. This is a great episode. It's not awesome. I didn't put it up in the top 10, or I don't think even the top 20. I know some people really, really love it. I noted some things in my full review that for why I felt it doesn't quite belong up that high. Barbara Bain is definitely great in this episode. There are other episodes where she does a fair bit more in terms of quantity, but in terms of the quality of her performance, this one is right up there. Number 8, season 2, episode 22, The Killing. This one is similar to The Mercenaries, where, Cinnamon is a little bit more aggressively sexual, if you want to say that, than normal. But this one has way more of a psychological plot, and there's a lot more, maybe not a lot more, that's not the right way to say it. There's a more observant Mark, and it requires a very different type of manipulation. It's more than just a distraction. And Cinnamon has to play this target very, very differently than she does in The Mercenaries. But she's able to pull it off extremely effectively. Number 7, season 1, episode 28, The Psychic. Oh my, this is one of the best episodes where Cinnamon Carter is able to keep the Mark occupied by planting ideas in his head and just kind of leading him towards the direction that the IMF need to take him in order to complete the mission. What a fantastic example of that it is. Number 6, similar idea, season 2, episode 9, The Seal. Very, very similar idea, where you have a target, a high-profile target with a high-profile object that the IMF needs to take from that target. And Cinnamon Carter has to be the key figure in terms of keeping the target occupied and distracted and putting ideas in his head. This one, I would say, is better than The Psychic. It's a better episode overall, and it's much better in terms of the teamwork involved. Cinnamon's role is significantly more advanced and better quality-wise. Now let's move on to the top 5 Barbara Bain episodes. These are the really, really good ones. At number 5, I'm going to put one which you probably would have overlooked during the first go round. I did. But then I thought about it and I said, no, this one belongs here. Season 1, Episode 20, The Legend. I love this one. At first glance, you look at it and you say that this is kind of an ordinary episode for Barbara and the Cinnamon character. She's just a plot device. She's just manipulating the mark. It's like many of the episodes that I've said. But in this case, she is the key plot device. The other characters who are involved in the episode, the men, yeah, they're doing stuff. But unlike previous episodes that I've mentioned, where Barbara's manipulation sets them up for success, no, their work sets her up for success in this one. Because she has to do the fundamental task, which is manipulating their target, Frederick Rudd. And she does it in such a low-key but awesomely effective manner. And the men set her up, if you really, really look at this carefully, instead of the other way around. Without her, all of the other work they did would be borderline meaningless. Number 4. You probably know which 4 are going to be at the top of the list. But I'll start with this one. Number 4. Season 1, Episode 9, A Spool There Was. Obviously, this one belongs up towards the top of the list. This is another one where, as an episode of Mission Impossible, strictly speaking, I don't really like this one so much. I've mentioned many times, and you can go and look back at my full review of that, which I probably will redo again, as I do my next go around of these videos. I like ones that feature the team. I like ones that feature the power of 5, that sort of thing. That's what I watch the show for. However, just based on Barbara's performance alongside her husband, with the obvious chemistry that they have and how well they work together and how they just look so perfect together on screen, there's no argument about the quality of their work and that her performance here is just fantastic. I just feel that this episode was a better fit for a different kind of series. But for the purposes of this list, it belongs here. Number 3, I'm going to give to Season 1, Episode 14, The Short Tail Spy. I discussed this one at length in the review for the revival episode, Church Bells in Bogota, to which it calls forward. Similar idea as A Spool There Was, just in terms of an emotional and quality performance, this is tremendous for Barbara Bain. As an MI episode and a plot, I don't find it to be too great, but she has good chemistry with Hans Gudegast. She obviously does with Martin Landau, and their plot together is extremely effective, even though I feel that the overall episode, as a Mission Impossible story, is a little bit lackluster. Number 2, Season 3, Episode 12, The Exchange. I've already discussed this one at length. It is one of the best episodes ever. I put it at number 6 on the big ranking list. My main point when I discussed Barbara's performance in this episode, which is nothing short of amazing, is that for a lot of the episode, especially in those scenes where Cinnamon is demonstrating the effects of her fear of claustrophobia, she is not acting. Barbara Bain really does suffer from claustrophobia, as I do. So this and the final one, which is coming, are the best examples of when it's real, you feel it. It's very difficult to not feel the terror and despair that Barbara displays in this one, with Cinnamon Carter truly being at risk. And the way that the story is told and the way that the production is done, that risk is real. We can feel it. There's no guarantee other than kind of the unspoken guarantee of TV series where we say, oh gosh, is Cinnamon going to come out of this one okay? So this one is definitely a really poignant episode that belongs towards the top of this list. But not at the very top. That one is reserved for Season 3, Episode 1, you knew it was coming, The Heir Apparent. And if you've watched any of my videos, and you can see the full review of that one right here, which I will definitely redo. It's probably the first one that I'm going to redo because I would like to put more detail, more proper detail into it. You don't have to ask why this one is at the top of the list. It's at the top of every list. It is the best episode of the series. It is the most well acted of the series. It's got so much going for it. Leaving aside that this is the best episode and one of the best scripts of the series, if not the best, I can only say that her performance is just absolutely enthralling in this one. The production, little things like the organ music that accompanies her character Celine as kind of the leitmotif, the scenery and the setting that just kind of enhance, everything about Celine in this one are what really make it perfect. And I give the nod to this one specifically when we're talking about Barbara here over the exchange, only because, again, this is acting. She has to act like a blind old woman. In the exchange, for most of it, she's not acting. And that's my list. So that's it. We're finished talking about the female agents, the guest agents, as well as the mainline agents. And yeah, that's a bit of a wrap when it comes to that. I guess somehow or other, I'm going to have to try and go back and come up. I do have some ideas for some other best of lists and things that I can talk about. So believe me, there's more content to come. But that's a wrap for this part of our journey through examining the show that we all love. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments. If there are other episodes where you think, hey, that was a really, really good one for Barbara, please let me know what you think and why. Love to hear it. Thank you guys again, and I will see you next time very, very soon with the next video.